The hum of muted conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft shuffle of designer luggage wheels filled the air of the Los Angeles International Airport's VIP lounge. The marble counters gleamed, the leather seating smelled of money and polish, and attendants in pressed uniforms moved with rehearsed smiles. It was the kind of place where privilege whispered in every corner, and inconvenience was treated like a crime. At the reception desk, a moment was unfolding that most people tried to ignore. A deaf traveler in a tailored navy suit stood trying to explain himself, his hands moving with urgency in a language that no one around him seemed to understand. The receptionist tilted her head with a mask of politeness that was cracking into irritation. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know what you're saying," she muttered, her tone carrying the familiar edge of someone who thought patience was a gift rather than a basic courtesy. The man's shoulders slumped, his gestures slowing as if the weight of exclusion was pressing down on him once again. He had been through this before. Too many times. Across the lounge, balancing a tray with expensive cappuccinos for executives who rarely remembered her name, Jasmine Williams froze at the sight. At 24, she had only been working in this elite space for 3 months, just a contract trainee server who mostly delivered drinks and stayed invisible. But what she was seeing made her chest tighten. This wasn't just another customer. This was a man being dismissed, erased, in the middle of a place that prided itself on world-class service. Jasmine knew that feeling. She had grown up watching her younger brother fight to be heard in a world that never slowed down for him. Without thinking, her feet moved before her mind could calculate the risk. She set down the tray carefully on a side table, walked to the counter, and raised her hands with the ease of someone who had lived in 2 languages for years. "Hello, sir. Do you need assistance?" Her fingers shaped the signs smoothly, her expression warm and clear. The man's eyes lit up instantly, like a light snapping on in a dark room. His tense shoulders relaxed, his lips curling into a grateful smile as his hands moved quickly. "Thank you. I thought nobody here would understand me," he signed, relief washing over his face. The lounge went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the flight announcements in the background seemed to fade. Wealthy travelers, airline staff, and junior employees all turned to stare at the scene. A young black trainee conversing fluently in sign language with a man the receptionist had all but brushed aside. What Jasmine didn't realize was that, just a few steps away, the CEO of the airline had stepped into the lounge from the executive elevator. Lawrence Carter, a tall man with gray eyes that had made seasoned executives tremble, now stood quietly watching, his attention fixed not on the deaf visitor but on the young woman bridging a gap no one else had cared to address. But not everyone watching felt admiration. Behind the counter, Victoria Sterling, the lounge supervisor known for her sharp tongue and sharper insecurities, stiffened. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Jasmine's hands move with precision. It was the kind of anger born not out of the scene itself but out of what it represented. Competence she didn't control, kindness she couldn't fake. To Victoria, every display of skill from someone beneath her felt like a threat. And this was unforgivable. "Well, isn't this just precious?" Victoria's voice cut through the silence like glass shattering. Heads turned as her words bounced across the polished lounge. "Our trainee thinks she's an interpreter now." Jasmine's blood chilled. Dozens of eyes shifted toward her. Executives sipping champagne, assistants checking flight schedules, even the receptionist who had just failed the traveler, all of them now staring, waiting for her to break. Victoria approached slowly, her heels striking the floor in measured beats that sounded like a countdown. "Sorry to interrupt this little performance," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But we have protocols in this airline. Trainees do not interpret for international passengers. That is the job of certified professionals, not someone who brings coffee." The deaf man's brow furrowed as he sensed the tension. Even without hearing the words, he felt the hostility in the air. Jasmine quickly signed to him, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Exactly," Victoria said sharply, her cold smile widening. "Jasmine, isn't it? 3 months here and you already think you're indispensable. Ambitious, aren't we?" The word, ambitious, rolled off her tongue like an insult. Some nearby employees shifted uncomfortably, but none dared intervene. The receptionist smirked slightly, relieved the attention had shifted off her own failure. Jasmine inhaled slowly, willing herself to stay calm. She had endured worse, much worse. Still, she raised her chin and spoke carefully. I was only trying to help. He needed assistance. He needed a professional, Victoria snapped, cutting her off. Not an intern desperate to show off. Do you think a few hand gestures will impress anyone in this lounge? The deaf man touched Jasmine's arm gently and signed with firm clarity, Don't apologize for being kind. Thank you. Jasmine interpreted aloud, her voice steady. And in that moment something shifted in the room. Some faces that had been blank now looked uneasy, the cruelty of Victoria's words too obvious to ignore. But Victoria wasn't done. She leaned closer, her voice raised just enough for everyone to hear. Listen, sweetheart. Your job is simple, carry trays, smile and stay invisible. Leave the real work to people who know what they're doing. It should have ended there. Most people in Jasmine's position would have lowered their eyes, muttered another apology and walked away. But instead, Jasmine turned to the deaf traveler, her hands flowing in elegant, practiced gestures. Sir, it was my honor to help you. I hope your meeting here goes smoothly. The man responded quickly, his signs bright and expressive. Jasmine laughed softly before interpreting. He says it's rare to meet someone who communicates so naturally. And he has a meeting scheduled with the airline's CEO about an accessibility project. The lounge fell into stunned silence. Even Victoria's smirk faltered. This wasn't just any traveler. He was someone important, someone with enough weight to sit across from Lawrence Carter himself. Victoria tried to recover. Well, I'm sure Mr. Carter will arrange for a suitable interpreter. A calm, deep voice broke through from behind. Actually, I believe I've already found the right one. The crowd turned as Lawrence Carter stepped forward, his presence instantly commanding the room. Victoria paled. The CEO had heard everything. The lounge felt like it was holding its breath. Lawrence Carter's words hung in the air, heavy with authority, impossible to ignore. Victoria Sterling froze in place, her carefully rehearsed superiority crumbling as she realized just how much the CEO had witnessed. Around them, the executives and travelers shifted uncomfortably, pretending to go back to their drinks, but everyone's ears strained to catch every word. Lawrence didn't waste time. His gray eyes locked on Jasmine with a calm intensity. Miss Williams, he said, his voice carrying across the polished room, I'd like you to join me and Mr. Martinez in the conference suite upstairs. Gasps rippled quietly through the lounge. Jasmine blinked, her breath catching. Mr. Martinez? That was the traveler's name? She hadn't asked, hadn't dared, but now she knew. She nodded quickly, fighting to keep her composure. The deaf man smiled warmly, signing with brisk confidence, Let's go. Jasmine translated softly, then fell into step beside him. The three of them moved toward the private elevator, and just before the doors closed, Lawrence turned his head slightly. Victoria, he said, his tone sharp as steel, see me in my office in 1 hour. We'll discuss your understanding of protocols. The elevator doors sealed shut on the stunned silence of the lounge. Upstairs, the air was different, quieter, heavier, the kind of silence only broken by the faint hum of engines outside on the tarmac. The executive conference suite overlooked the runways, sunlight glinting off the wings of jets lined up for departure. Inside, the polished wood table stretched like a stage for conversations that could shift millions of dollars in deals. Jasmine stood at the threshold, unsure if she belonged in a space like this. Lawrence gestured for her to sit. Please, make yourself comfortable. She sat carefully, hands folded in her lap. The traveler, Diego Martinez, adjusted his suit and signed with a smile. You were extraordinary downstairs. Most people would have turned away. Jasmine translated automatically, but Lawrence surprised her by nodding before she even finished. I understood, Lawrence said quietly, his fingers moving clumsily through a few basic signs. Jasmine's eyes widened. He wasn't fluent, but he knew enough to follow. She turned to him in surprise. You sign. Barely, he admitted. But enough. His gaze shifted, softening for the first time. My daughter was deaf. She taught me what little I know. His words trailed off, his jaw tightening as if holding back something heavier. She passed away 3 years ago. The room grew still. Diego bowed his head respectfully. Jasmine's throat tightened, her own memories pressing forward. The night spent with her younger brother Danny, helping him navigate a world stacked against him, the constant fights to make people listen. She blinked back the sting in her eyes and signed carefully for Diego, who nodded with quiet understanding. This project we're discussing, Lawrence continued, his tone steadying, isn't just about public relations or ticking compliance boxes. Mr. Martinez leads the largest accessibility organization in the country. We are negotiating a partnership worth millions, one that could make air travel genuinely accessible for people who've been ignored for far too long. Diego's hands moved quickly, his expression passionate. And today what I saw proved why this matters. That young woman at your lounge didn't just translate. She connected. She understood not just my words but my intent. That's rare. That's what real accessibility looks like. Jasmine translated, her voice steady, but inside her mind was spinning. This wasn't just an awkward moment in a lounge. This was something massive. A partnership. A cause. And somehow she had been pulled into the center of it. Lawrence studied her. Your brother, Daniel, isn't it? Jasmine's eyes widened. Captain of the deaf school's basketball team. Full scholarship in graphic design. 17 years old. She froze, heat rising in her cheeks. How do you know that? I make it my business to know about people worth noticing, Lawrence said simply. You work part-time at a restaurant in addition to your shifts here, to help your family with bills. And you learn sign language because you refuse to let your brother face the world alone. For a moment Jasmine felt exposed, every piece of her private life laid bare on the polished conference table. But then she caught something in Lawrence's eyes, not judgment, not pity, but respect. Genuine, unfiltered respect. Diego smiled as he watched Jasmine interpret, then signed something that made her heart skip. Would you consider leading this project? Not as a trainee. Not as an assistant. As a senior consultant with authority, resources, and a team of your own. Jasmine froze mid-sign. Her own voice stammered as she translated. He's asking me to lead? Lawrence leaned forward, his hands folded. That's right. With a salary to match. Your own office. The autonomy to shape how we build accessibility into this airline from the ground up. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 months ago she was running coffee orders. Now she was being offered a role that could change not just her life, but the lives of countless others. But even as she sat there stunned, another reality pressed against her thoughts. Victoria. Jasmine had worked under her long enough to know the woman would never let this stand. She could already imagine the venomous emails, the whispered rumors, the sabotage. Jasmine clenched her fists under the table. Lawrence must have noticed the flicker of tension in her face. I should warn you, he said, his voice low. Victoria won't take this quietly. She'll do everything she can to undermine you. Diego tilted his head, then signed a pointed question, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. Are you ready for that fight? Jasmine inhaled slowly, then let the breath out. Her voice, when it came, carried a steadiness she hadn't shown before. You think I've survived this long in her shadow by being naive? She's been whispering and scheming for months. And I've been documenting every word. The room went still. Lawrence's eyebrow arched. Diego leaned forward, intrigued. Jasmine reached into her bag and placed a small digital recorder on the table. 47 hours of conversations. Her comments about interns who don't know their place. About diversity hires who are just for show. About me specifically. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She underestimates me because she thinks I'm harmless. That's her mistake. Lawrence's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Diego signed slowly, almost reverently, then maybe the real question isn't whether you're ready for war. It's whether Victoria has any idea who she just picked a fight with. Jasmine looked between them, her pulse steady now, her fear replaced by something sharper, resolve. She has 72 hours to decide whether she wants to walk away quietly or be exposed. Either way, I'm not the one who should be nervous. Lawrence leaned back, studying her with the same expression he used when closing billion-dollar deals. For the first time in years, he felt like he was watching not just an employee but a strategist, a fighter, a leader. The offer still hung in the air, waiting. Jasmine nodded slowly. "I'll accept. But on one condition. I get full autonomy to deal with Victoria as I see fit. No interference. No micromanagement. She chooses how this ends, quietly, or as a lesson the entire company will never forget." The smile that spread across Lawrence's face wasn't just approval. It was recognition. Deal. The hum of the engines outside the glass windows filled the background as Jasmine left the conference suite later that afternoon, still dazed by what had just unfolded. The offer replayed in her mind on a loop. Senior consultant, her own office, the chance to lead a project that could reshape the airline's future. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel proud. She had stepped into a moment that wasn't meant for her, spoken up when everyone else turned away, and now doors were opening that she hadn't even dared to knock on. But pride was quickly replaced by caution. She knew Victoria Sterling too well. The woman didn't just dislike her, she despised her existence in this space. Jasmine could already imagine her supervisor seething back downstairs in the lounge, replaying the humiliation of being corrected by the CEO in front of everyone. Victoria wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was the type to strike back hard and soon. Down on the third floor, Jasmine's instincts proved correct. Victoria sat at her glossy desk in the manager's office of the VIP lounge, her fingers flying across the keyboard as anger boiled through her veins. Each keystroke was sharp, her nails tapping with fury as she drafted a carefully worded email to the executive board. Subject: concerns about favoritism and unqualified promotions. She typed paragraphs about how inappropriate it was to elevate a temporary lounge trainee into a high-level role. She framed her words as professional, but the venom seeped through every sentence. She knew how to play the corporate game, cloak prejudice in policy, disguise envy as concern for standards. By the time she hit send, her face had twisted into a self-satisfied smirk. In her mind, she had already begun dismantling Jasmine's credibility. What Victoria didn't know was that Jasmine had been expecting exactly this move. As soon as she returned to her small apartment that night, she opened her laptop and began organizing her files. Folders upon folders, neatly labeled, Victoria emails, lounge incidents, recordings. Months of quietly collecting evidence were now lined up like soldiers waiting for a command. Jasmine scrolled through audio clips, Victoria's sharp voice ridiculing interns, dismissing diversity hires, mocking guests behind their backs. The words were brutal, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that outrage wasn't enough. Documentation was power. Her brother Danny had taught her that. She remembered watching him in high school, recording every interaction when teachers treated him unfairly because he was deaf. He never raised his voice. He never begged for fairness. He just gathered evidence, waiting for the right moment to make people accountable. Jasmine had adopted that same discipline. She wasn't going to fight Victoria with emotion. She was going to fight her with precision. The next morning at the lounge, the atmosphere was thick with gossip. Employees whispered in corners, sneaking glances at Jasmine as she passed. She knew Victoria's emails were already spreading like wildfire. Some staff avoided her eyes, others gave her quick nods of sympathy. The receptionist, the same one who had dismissed Mr. Martinez, looked smug as if enjoying the drama unfolding. Jasmine kept her expression calm, her posture steady, but inside she noted every reaction. She wasn't just surviving this. She was observing, calculating, learning who could be trusted and who would fold under pressure. Midway through her shift, Victoria appeared, striding through the lounge with her usual dramatic heels clicking against the marble. Her voice carried just loud enough for staff and guests to overhear. "Jasmine," she said sweetly, too sweetly, "you really should be careful. This airline doesn't take kindly to people stepping outside their lanes. Especially trainees who think they're suddenly executives overnight." Jasmine looked up from the tray she was organizing, meeting Victoria's eyes with quiet steadiness. "Noted, ma'am," she replied softly. There was no sarcasm, no visible anger, just calm acknowledgement. It was enough to make Victoria narrow her eyes. She had expected panic, maybe even tears. Instead, Jasmine gave her nothing to feed on. Later that afternoon, Jasmine was called to the executive floor. She entered a sleek office where Lawrence Carter was reviewing documents with Diego Martinez. Without hesitation, Lawrence gestured for her to sit. As expected, Victoria has begun her campaign, he said dryly, sliding a printed email across the desk. Jasmine read it silently. The words dripped with false professionalism. Concerns about favoritism, about undermining established protocols, about inexperienced staff being placed in critical positions. At the end, Victoria had suggested the board conduct a full review of Jasmine's appointment. Jasmine set the paper down calmly. "She's predictable," she said simply. Diego signed with a grin. "So what's your move?" Jasmine leaned back slightly, her voice calm but sharp as glass. "She doesn't realize she's playing checkers while I'm playing chess. I've documented her for months. 47 hours of recordings. Dozens of emails. Witnesses. She thinks I'm just a trainee with no power. But she doesn't understand. I don't need to scream to win. I just need to wait for her to hand me the rope, and she already has." Lawrence studied her with an approving expression. "So you're ready?" "I've been ready," Jasmine replied. Her fingers brushed over the small recorder she always kept in her purse, a habit she had developed long before this internship. She looked at both men with quiet determination. "Victoria's not fighting me. She's fighting her own record. I'm just the one who's going to hold up the mirror." Over the next few days, Victoria doubled down. She sent memos questioning Jasmine's qualifications. She pulled other managers aside, whispering about special treatment. She even arranged for Jasmine to be assigned extra menial tasks, hoping to humiliate her publicly. But Jasmine moved through it all with unshakable calm, quietly collecting every misstep, every overheard insult, every slip of arrogance. Staff began to notice. Some even started to shift their loyalty quietly, sensing that something bigger was at play. The tension built until it finally broke when Victoria called an emergency executive meeting, confident she had the upper hand. She believed she was walking into a room where her polished words and long tenure would crush Jasmine's credibility once and for all. But what she didn't know was that Jasmine had already set the stage. The evidence was ready. The boardroom showdown was inevitable. And this time, Jasmine wasn't stepping into a fight she wasn't prepared for. She had been preparing all along. The boardroom on the executive floor of the airline's headquarters was a space designed to intimidate. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lights, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of the runways where jets lifted off into the gray Los Angeles sky. It was the kind of room where decisions worth billions were made, where reputations were built, or destroyed, in a single meeting. On this morning, every leather chair was filled. Executives sat in polished suits, shuffling papers, sipping coffee, murmuring in low voices. At the head of the table sat Lawrence Carter, calm and unreadable. The doors opened with a sharp click of heels. Victoria Sterling entered with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. Her smile was polished, her folder clutched tightly against her chest like a weapon. She didn't spare Jasmine a glance as she moved to her seat, though the younger woman was already there, sitting quietly with a small notebook and a recorder resting on the table in front of her. "Good morning, gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice smooth as silk. "I asked for this urgent meeting because I believe there's a matter that requires immediate attention, an issue that could damage the reputation of this airline if left unchecked." A murmur of interest passed through the room. Lawrence remained silent, his chin resting on his hand as he watched her carefully. Victoria continued, her words rehearsed and deliberate. "As you know, we pride ourselves on excellence and professionalism. But recently, a trainee from the VIP lounge has been elevated into a consultant role without the proper qualifications or experience. This impulsive promotion, I fear, is not only unwise but could be seen as favoritism, or worse, a token gesture to satisfy diversity optics." She let the words hang in the air, as if she had just delivered a devastating truth. Several executives shifted uncomfortably, their expressions tightening. Jasmine's face remained neutral, her hands folded neatly on the table. Lawrence finally spoke. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" His tone was calm, but his eyes locked onto Victoria with surgical precision. "I'm suggesting," Victoria said smoothly, "that we reconsider this appointment. At minimum, conduct a thorough review of the decision. We cannot afford to risk our credibility by placing unqualified individuals into senior roles simply because they happen to be in the right place at the right time." She allowed herself a small smile, certain she had trapped Jasmine in front of the highest level of leadership. But Jasmine did not flinch. Instead, she reached forward and pressed a button on the small recorder resting in front of her. A familiar voice filled the room, the sharp, unmistakable tone of Victoria Sterling. "These interns are all the same," her recorded voice sneered. "Hired to check boxes. They know nothing, yet they think they deserve promotions. People like that should learn to stay in their place." The room went silent. Several executives stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances. Victoria's face paled, her smile faltering. "That," she stammered. "That's out of context." Jasmine's voice cut in, calm and steady. "Context." She clicked again. Another clip played. "I don't care how many hand gestures she makes," Victoria's recorded voice said mockingly. "She's just here to carry trays. An intern is an intern, especially those who come from, you know where." A heavy silence fell over the room, the kind that thickened with every passing second. Lawrence's eyes never left Victoria's face. "Stop this," Victoria snapped suddenly, her voice rising. "This is illegal. You can't just—" "Actually," Lawrence interrupted, his tone sharp as steel, "recordings made in common areas of the workplace are perfectly legal when documenting systematic misconduct." His words landed like a gavel. Jasmine leaned forward, her expression still calm. "There's more. 47 hours of recordings over the past 2 months. 23 discriminatory comments about race. 31 derogatory remarks about interns and junior staff. And multiple documented instances of hostile instructions to staff, telling them to ignore me and others. This isn't favoritism. This is evidence." Victoria's composure cracked completely. She stood abruptly, her voice trembling with fury. "You can't believe her. This is a setup. She's manipulating all of you." The boardroom doors opened suddenly. Diego Martinez stepped in, flanked by 2 reporters with cameras. "Apologies for the interruption," he signed, his words voiced by an interpreter trailing him. "But when I heard there was a discussion about discrimination here, I thought it would be important to document it, for transparency." Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Cameras. Reporters. Witnesses. This wasn't just a private meeting anymore. It was public, undeniable, unspinnable. Lawrence rose slowly, his presence filling the room like thunder rolling in the distance. "Victoria Sterling," he said, each syllable deliberate, "in 20 years of leading this airline, I have never witnessed such blatant toxicity and discrimination from someone entrusted with a leadership role." His voice hardened, the final verdict forming. "You are terminated for cause. Security will escort you out immediately." Gasps echoed around the table. Victoria's face twisted, a desperate mix of anger and fear. "You can't do this to me. I've given this company 10 years. "You gave this company nothing but poison," Lawrence said coldly. "And now you will answer for it." 2 security officers entered quietly, standing at her sides. Victoria's protests turned shrill as they guided her toward the door. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. All of you." Her voice echoed down the hall until the doors closed behind her. Silence settled once again in the boardroom. Every executive's gaze shifted toward Jasmine, who sat composed, not triumphant, just steady. Diego gave her a small nod of approval, his hands moving slowly. That was justice, not revenge. Lawrence returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Miss Williams just gave this company, and this industry, a lesson in accountability." His eyes swept the table. "Let it be a reminder to all of us. Prejudice has no place here, and those who underestimate the people around them do so at their own risk." Jasmine lowered her gaze briefly, exhaling the breath she had been holding. She hadn't just defended herself. She had shifted the balance of power. For the first time, the room full of executives looked at her not as a trainee, not even as a consultant, but as someone who belonged at the table. And though Victoria had been escorted out, Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. Battles like this didn't end with a single meeting. They ignited movements. The fallout from the boardroom showdown rippled through the airline like turbulence shaking a jet mid-flight. By the next morning, whispers traveled through every floor of headquarters and every corner of the VIP lounge. Staff spoke in hushed tones about how Victoria Sterling had been escorted out by security, her sharp voice echoing down the marble hall for the last time. For years she had ruled the lounge with intimidation, but her reign ended in a single meeting, undone by her own arrogance and the recordings of the very woman she tried to crush. Jasmine Williams returned to work that day not as a trainee, but as the newly appointed senior consultant for accessibility and inclusion. Her badge was different now, her office relocated from the back corners of the lounge to the executive floor. The first time she walked into her new workspace, a glass-walled office with a view of the runways, she paused for a long moment. The gold plaque on the door with her name felt surreal. 3 months earlier she was delivering cappuccinos to executives who didn't bother to remember her face. Now she was sitting across from the CEO, helping design a program that could transform air travel for millions. Diego Martinez became her closest collaborator. Almost daily he met with her and Lawrence to strategize on implementing accessibility initiatives. Better training for staff, sign language interpreters at every major hub, redesigned boarding announcements with text displays, and partnerships with advocacy groups. Jasmine contributed ideas that came not from textbooks, but from lived experience. Memories of helping her younger brother Danny navigate airports where no one understood him. She pushed for solutions that addressed not just compliance but dignity. Lawrence listened carefully, often silent but always attentive. More than once, his eyes softened when Jasmine spoke, as if he were hearing echoes of his own late daughter's voice in her determination. But while Jasmine was rising, Victoria was burning. 3 floors below, her office stood empty, her name already scraped off the door. By the end of the week, her access badge was deactivated, her belongings boxed up. Yet Victoria Sterling was not the type to accept defeat quietly. In a small apartment across town, she hunched over her laptop, rage burning in her chest. If the company had turned against her, she would take the fight outside. She drafted a message to a well-known business columnist at a corporate newspaper, offering an exclusive. Her subject line, racial favoritism at major airline. The story she pitched was twisted. She painted herself as a whistleblower, claiming the CEO had promoted an unqualified intern purely because of diversity optics. She accused Jasmine of manipulating sympathy, of playing the victim card. She suggested that the new accessibility project was nothing more than a PR stunt. When she hit send, Victoria leaned back, imagining the headlines splashed across morning papers. In her mind, this would be her revenge, the final blow that would ruin Jasmine's credibility and force the airline into damage control. But Jasmine had anticipated this too. For weeks, she had been preparing, quietly sending copies of her recordings, transcripts, and timelines to trusted allies. Diego had contacts in the press, people who respected him as a national leader in accessibility. Lawrence had his own relationships with media executives, forged over decades. Before Victoria's story could even hit the presses, the newspaper editor cross-checked the claims with the material Jasmine had already submitted. What emerged wasn't Victoria's version of events, it was the truth. The very next afternoon, headlines blazed across news sites and television broadcasts, but not the ones Victoria had dreamed of. Airline fires executive for systematic discrimination. Recordings revealed 2 months of racist and hostile comments. Articles detailed how a manager in the VIP lounge had belittled staff, mocked diversity, and even insulted paying customers. They described how a young black woman had not only exposed the abuse but had also been promoted for her integrity and skill. Reporters praised the airline for taking swift, transparent action. In her apartment, Victoria's hands trembled as she scrolled through the articles. The very newspaper she had contacted now featured her as the villain, not the whistleblower. Her quotes, those she thought were whispered in safety, played in video clips online, her voice dripping with contempt as the world listened. Within hours, her name trended on social media, not as a respected manager but as a cautionary tale of corporate cruelty. Meanwhile, Jasmine's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from advocacy groups, industry leaders, and even passengers thanking her for what she had done. "You stood up for us," one message read from a mother of a deaf child. "My son has been ignored in airports too many times to count. Today you gave us hope." Jasmine smiled softly as she read the words, the weight of the past few days sinking in. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading something bigger than herself. Back at headquarters, Lawrence called her into his office. He was holding a stack of newspapers, each with a headline praising the airline's bold stance on inclusion. He set them down and looked at Jasmine with a rare smile. "You've turned a crisis into an opportunity," he said simply. "And you did it with precision I've only seen in the best strategists. My daughter would have admired you." His voice softened at the last line and Jasmine's chest tightened, but she stayed composed. Diego, sitting across from them, signed with energy. "The question now isn't whether this program will succeed. It's how far we can take it. Nationwide? International? The model you're building here could change the industry." Jasmine translated for Lawrence, then spoke in her own voice, steady and clear. "Then let's not stop here. Let's make sure no traveler ever feels invisible again." Outside the office, the view stretched across the busy runways. Planes lifted into the sky, one after another, leaving trails across the horizon. For the first time in her life, Jasmine felt like she wasn't just watching others take flight. She was in the cockpit of her own story, charting a path no one had expected her to fly. And while Victoria was scrambling to salvage the wreckage of her career, Jasmine was already soaring into a future that no amount of malice could hold down. 6 months later, the airline's name was everywhere, not for scandal or controversy, but for transformation. What had begun as a single confrontation in the Los Angeles VIP lounge had blossomed into a nationwide movement. Journalists now called the Accessibility Project the gold standard for air travel. Trade magazines featured cover stories about the airline's commitment to inclusion, praising not only the boldness of the program but the woman behind it, Jasmine Williams. Her office, once a dream she hardly dared to imagine, had expanded into a full division with its own staff, budget, and authority. The plaque on her door now read Executive Director of Accessibility and Inclusion. From that office, Jasmine oversaw projects that reshaped everything. Visual boarding announcements, real-time text communication for deaf travelers, multilingual support lines, training modules for every employee in the network. Her fingerprints were on every detail. She didn't just design policies, she rewrote the culture of the airline. Danny, her younger brother, visited often. On his first tour of her new floor, he stood in front of the window overlooking the runways, his hands moving quickly with excitement. "You did it, Jasmine. They see you now." Jasmine laughed as she signed back, "Not just me. They see you too. This was always about more than my career. It was about making sure kids like you never feel invisible in places like this." Danny beamed, pride shining in his eyes. For the first time he looked at an airport not as an obstacle, but as a place where he belonged. Lawrence Carter kept his promise as well. In honor of his late daughter Sarah, he established the Sarah program, offering full scholarships to students from marginalized communities who wanted to pursue careers in communication and accessibility. Jasmine personally reviewed applications, meeting with candidates who reminded her of herself. Young, underestimated, and hungry for a chance. Lawrence, once known as a cold strategist, had softened in subtle ways. In private moments, he admitted to Jasmine that she had helped him rediscover something he thought he had lost with Sarah: faith that compassion could be powerful, even in the cutthroat world of business. Diego Martinez remained her closest partner. Together, they traveled to conferences in New York, Chicago, and Washington, presenting the model they had built. Jasmine's keynote speeches became viral sensations online, watched by millions. In them, she didn't speak in corporate jargon or polished platitudes. She spoke from lived truth, about turning discrimination into strategy, about how kindness wasn't weakness but a form of power, about how inclusion wasn't charity, it was good business. Audiences listened not because she demanded it, but because she spoke with the authority of someone who had lived every word. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling's name had become synonymous with disgrace. The recordings were still studied in business ethics classes, used as case studies of what not to do. Her attempts to rebuild her career collapsed one by one. No major airline, hotel chain, or hospitality group would touch her. The risk was too high, the evidence too public. She sold her penthouse to pay legal bills. Her once glittering social circle vanished overnight. By the time she found work again, it was at a small regional office far from the glamour she had once flaunted. Her salary barely covered rent on a modest apartment, a dizzying fall for someone who used to bark orders in marble lobbies. Occasionally, late at night, Victoria would type Jasmine's name into a search bar. Every result twisted the knife deeper. Award-winning executive redefines accessibility in travel. Jasmine Williams honored at National Inclusion Summit. From trainee to industry leader, a story of transformation. The woman she once tried to humiliate had become the face of a movement. And the most painful part wasn't just the success. It was the realization that Jasmine had always been what Victoria pretended to be: competent, respected, and admired. Back in Los Angeles, the VIP lounge looked different now. New staff protocols ensured that no traveler, deaf or otherwise, was dismissed or ignored. A sign language interpreter was on call 24/7. The same marble counters that once echoed with Victoria's sarcasm now reflected a culture of genuine service. The receptionist who had once dismissed Diego Martinez had been retrained, her performance monitored closely. Even the air felt lighter, as if cruelty itself had been swept out with Victoria's departure. Mr. Parker, the longtime security guard who had seen everything, often smiled when new employees asked about Jasmine. "That young woman changed this company," he would say. "Not by shouting or demanding, but by proving that compassion and strategy can live in the same person." She reminded everyone here that treating people with respect isn't extra, it's the job. One afternoon, during a quarterly board meeting, Lawrence presented the latest numbers. Since launching the accessibility division, revenue is up 340%. Partnerships with advocacy groups are bringing in millions. More importantly, our reputation has shifted from reactive to innovative. We are no longer just an airline. We are an example. He turned to Jasmine, his voice firm but warm. "And we owe that to you." Applause filled the room. Jasmine nodded, humbled but steady. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been ignored in a lobby, dismissed at a counter, or silenced in a meeting. She had turned her own struggle into a platform that lifted others. That was the real victory. 6 months after that first moment in the lounge, Jasmine Williams stood taller, not because she sought recognition, but because she had earned it. She hadn't just survived corporate sabotage. She had rewritten the story. Victoria Sterling's downfall was a cautionary tale, but Jasmine's rise was a blueprint for how determination, evidence, and compassion could topple arrogance and build something lasting in its place. As planes thundered into the sky outside her window, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. She understood now what her brother had always told her: the world underestimates people like them until it's too late. And when it's too late, they don't just prove their worth, they redefine what worth means. For those listening to this story, remember, cruelty might win the room for a moment, but integrity wins the future. Jasmine's journey is proof that where you start never decides where you finish. It's your courage to act, your discipline to prepare, and your refusal to be silenced that writes the ending. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe and follow for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and transformation. Because just like Jasmine, you too can turn obstacles into opportunities, and prove that kindness backed by strength is unstoppable.